Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage Jim Murren, Chairman and CEO of MGM Resorts International. Bernhard, Executive Director of UNLV's International Gaming Institute. And Jim Allen, CEO of Seminole Gaming and Chairman of Hard Rock International.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to yet another exciting G2E. For those of you who were with us last evening, you got to see a very special event at the G2E's Hall of Fame dinner, which is particularly a poignant moment for me and for many in my field of gaming education, because Patty Becker, among others, was honored, our former executive director of the International Gaming Institute, and she herself is someone who stands on the shoulders of giants, many of whom are in this room. But in our world, she stands on the shoulders of people like Bob Fess, who also was honored last night. And Bob, of course, is someone who founded the gaming law program at my university. But if I can share a personal aside, Bob was someone who also drove me to school every day of my childhood until that happy day when I got my driver's license at the age of 16. And as a kid who grew up in Las Vegas, I've come to appreciate these giants. I've come to appreciate the gentle giants like Bob Fess, people who brought in their cars back in the 1980s these massive Miami Vice cell phones. Remember these huge devices?
The Panasonic.
Yeah, so it looks like Don Johnson. But a very gentle Don Johnson, a very kind Don Johnson, who was on the phone with governors and heads of state during a very important growth period for this industry. It was during that period, of course, that people like Jan Jones were leading my hometown as this woman who I knew growing up as somebody who was advertising automobiles and supermarkets, and the Stanford graduate that went on to these very impressive leadership roles as the mayor of Las Vegas and ultimately in a role at Caesars. And also a moment when our friend Ernie Stevens, of course, was making great strides in leading the tribal gaming industry to exciting new heights. So this is one of those industries that to many on the outside might not seem like it has a tremendous amount of history, or to the degree it has a history. It has the history Jim and I were talking off stage about. You grew up in Atlantic City, I grew up in Las Vegas. People have assumptions about you when you grew up in Atlantic City or Las Vegas, and those assumptions don't assume that you spent your youth in the library, right? They assume that you hung out with the mob, right?
That was certainly the case in the 70s.
Yes. And yet again, this industry has quite a proud history, and it's very important to celebrate it as we did last night. So speaking of leadership and speaking of history, it's my profound honor to introduce a little bit more formally Jim and Jim up here on the stage. And so if you'll indulge me for a moment, I want to give you a little bit of background on folks I'm sure you already know, but may not know everything about. Our friend Jim Murren, to my left, is of course Chairman and CEO of MGM Resorts International, and a baseball guy as well, who grew up in Fairfield, Connecticut, played ball for Trinity College, headed to Wall Street with Cyrus Lawrence as a securities analyst, and then earned the Chartered Financial Analyst certification in 1991. From there, he rose through the ranks very quickly. He was elected a member of the firm's board of directors, becoming the youngest ever member of the company's board. And during a prolific career on Wall Street, he then brought about a pivotal recapitalization of a little company called MGM Grand in 1996, and served as managing director of the U.S. equity research sector within Deutsche Bank. In 1998, he took the leap over to the corporate sector, joining MGM as CFO and a member of its board of directors. In 1999, he took on the president's role and was promoted, of course, to COO in 2007, becoming chairman and CEO in December 2008, his 10th year at the company. Jim's also chair of the American Gaming Association Board of Directors, and is a member of the Board of Trustees of the Brookings Institute, an institute that has a satellite campus over on Maryland Parkway here at UNLV. In 2013, he was named executive chairman of the board of directors of the Corporate Responsibility Officers Association, a professional society for corporate responsibility practitioners. He was also named, and many of you probably heard of this, and you probably felt a level of pride for the industry when this happened. He was named by President Obama to serve on the National Infrastructure Advisory Council. Again, a reflection of the growth of an industry that's come a long way since my great-great-grandfather came out here to Las Vegas, having been kicked out of Texas for working in casinos. Now we have CEOs of this industry named to very prestigious boards at the highest levels of government. During his CFO years, Jim was repeatedly honored as the gaming and lodging industry's top CFO by Institutional Investor magazine, and more recently he was recognized as Executive of the Year by Casino Journal in 2013. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Jim Murren.
Thank you.
To my right is another Jim, Jim Allen. I'll call you Mr. Allen and Mr. Murren, is chairman of Hard Rock International, thereby playing a really cool leadership role with one of the most recognized brand names in the world. And also CEO of Seminole Gaming, of course, which is one of the most widely recognized and influential success stories in the history of tribal gaming. Jim, growing up in Atlantic City, and I appreciate this as a hospitality professor, began his career as a sous chef in Atlantic City restaurants before being hired by Bally's in Atlantic City. After that, his journey up the leadership ladder took him to several properties in Atlantic City, spending time with some of the nation's greatest developers before joining Resorts, which, as many of you know, of course, was then operated by Saul Kerzner. When Kerzner sold Resorts and bought the Atlantis in the Bahamas, he brought Jim along to help him develop what has become one of the most recognizable casino resort destination attractions on the planet. Later, a headhunter told him, I understand, that the Seminole Indian tribe was looking for a chief executive officer that could build casino resorts for them. Jim took the job and oversaw the construction and completion of 2 casino hotels in Florida, now iconic casino hotels, one in Hollywood and one in Tampa. They were built at the same time, on time, and under budget, which CFO types can appreciate.
We've never done that. Good job.
Jim then told the Seminole tribe they should think about buying this Hard Rock brand name since they were already paying a great deal of money for its use. Again, something a CFO might appreciate. Seminoles agreed, the deal was consummated, which led to the development of Hard Rock hotel, casinos, and resorts around the world. Listen to this data. Today, the Hard Rock International has about $4 billion in annual gross revenues, 138 branded cafes, as well as hotels, casinos, and concert venues in 55 countries. Again, the globalization of this industry and the degree to which G2E represents a truly global series of businesses is quite remarkable. About 32,000 people work directly for the company or its franchises. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Jim Allen.
Thank you. Thank you.
So I get to have fun up here and ask a series of questions of 2 very sharp and very interesting folks who have had fascinating trajectories in this industry. And I want to start by talking about your brands. I'm struck in observing both of your companies that there have been really profound successes, perhaps unmatched in some ways. MGM, famously and here locally, has recently developed the Hakkasan brand, which has captured this nightclub market in a way that's terribly, terribly hip in hours long after I've gone to sleep. And has helped MGM tap into this elusive sort of next generation market that so many of us at this gathering are going to be talking about this week. And meanwhile, I've heard you present, Jim, in Japan on a couple of occasions and doing a really nice job of presenting a tight presentation around MGM as really an entertainment brand, an entertainment company with a wide variety of amenities. Meanwhile, the Hard Rock is iconic in its own right, and I'm struck walking through Hard Rock properties by how young the crowd is when there's no possible way many of these kids can possibly know the rock bands on the walls of these properties. And it's a hard thing to stay hip. I fail at this miserably as a university professor who's confronted by young people on a daily basis, and I will drop a reference to a Simpsons episode, which the students just roll their eyes and say, oh, seriously, you're talking about The Simpsons? That's supposed to be your cool, hip, young reference? And somehow Hard Rock has solved this puzzle and has maintained the status of cool over many years and across many properties and many different types of amenities now. So maybe we can start with you then, Jim, and talk a little bit about what it's like to manage a brand like that. I know you put a lot of effort into rebranding and within the brand. Can you talk a little bit about that?
So I think when we look at the Hard Rock brand, we have a couple slogans, 8 to 80. And that's really the demographics of our customer base. And certainly the brand, was started in 1971 by Peter and Isaac, and they have created this legend with love all, serve all, and save the planet. And when we look at, I started in the business back in '79 in the casino business, and it was about gaming, it was about casinos. But the Hard Rock brand has this amazing ability to attract people from all walks of life. And under our ownership, which we announced back in 2006, we've really tried to focus on being more current. And a good example of that is in June of this year, our Artist of the Year is Rihanna. So we're working with her directly. If you go to all the Hard Rocks in the world, and actually we're up to 58 countries now, so we're continuing to grow this year. And whether it's Shakira, whether it's Rihanna, those relationships are very important to us. Certainly the history of the Rolling Stones and the Beatles and Elvis, those things are important. But as we look at the brand, it's really about expanding, not just in gaming, but expanding the brand itself. And hopefully that creates additional foot traffic on an annual basis. What we do know is last year, 92 million people visited Hard Rock sites around the world. So if we can convert some of that, obviously, to the more profitable segments, a franchise cafe is wonderful to have, but it's more about building the brand, so that creates foot traffic on a worldwide basis. Clearly, the brand has had its best years recently, and we hope to continue to grow. Probably have 22. We have 22 opened hotels now around the world, and about another 18 or 20 on the books with signed deals coming in the near future.
Wow. So Jim, let's talk about MGM. It's got to be a bit of a challenge because as MGM has swallowed up unique and certainly iconic properties and companies in and of itself, you've probably had to sort of adjust and navigate a complex world. But can you talk a little bit about how you conceive of MGM's branding these days?
Well, swallowed up sounds a little harsh. Embraced.
That's right. That's right.
Hugged.
Brought into the family.
Brought in. I'm struck by how this industry has evolved. I think you talked about it, Bo, and Jim obviously is referring to it. But even when I joined, and I'm not that old, it seemed like it in that little bio thing, but when I joined, 70% of MGM's revenue was gaming revenue. And here in Las Vegas today, 70% of our revenue is non-gaming. And it's not that gaming has shrunk for us. Actually, we've grown our gaming volumes, both table and slot volumes, over that 16-year period. But the non-gaming has exploded for us. And it's, I think, a big part of why Las Vegas is going to have an all-time record this year in terms of visitation. Companies like ours and the others here, like the Venetian and Wynn and Caesars, are drawing more and more people here. The average age of someone coming to Las Vegas, as you know, has fallen by 5 years. It's pretty stunning that, 5 years ago, the average age was 51 years old. Now it's 46. And that's exciting. So how do you create a brand connection? Well, you invest in your brands, as Jim has with Hard Rock. Try to keep them relevant and current all the time. You partner with other brands that bring a different demographic to you. Hakkasan would be an example. We have several of those. And you go with what you know, and for us, it's entertainment. So we sold 7 million tickets last year, just here in Las Vegas, to our theaters and our arenas. And now we're building yet a third arena that opens up in 2 years. And so we are the entertainment capital of at least the United States, I think the world, and we're going to continue to move that forward. And with that brings all the type of artists that Jim's referring to that we can personalize around brands. We just built a festival lot across from Luxor, and we've got a lot of bands here this weekend, they were last weekend. It's a lot of fun. I think the point I would bring up, just to add to the obvious, is that brands are really meaningless without the people around them. No one has to come to Las Vegas. People come here because they have a good time, they come here to work, they come here to connect with friends and family, and it's about the personal connection they have with the employees. And so many cases, a person's perception of, say, MGM or Bellagio or Mandalay or any of our properties is really personalized by the individuals they meet during that trip. And if that experience is a great experience, they're going to keep coming back and they're going to say great things about the brand. If the experience is not a fantastic experience, I might not get the complaint letter, but they're going to go home and tell all their friends what a bad time they had, and we're out of business. So investing in the employees, investing in the people, is really the most important part of investing in the brand.
Let's talk a little bit about the shifts that we're all alluding to here, which is the generational shifts, which seem so profound. to those of us who are getting on in years. Clearly, both of your companies have succeeded on the hospitality, leisure, lodging side in attracting millennials to places like Hakkasan, to places like Hard Rock Cafes and your concert venues and what have you. Are you doing things on the gaming side with that elusive millennial gaming customer, or perhaps not so elusive, but we hear about the challenges that this industry faces as it pertains to attracting the millennial generation as a gaming patron. Can you talk a little bit about what your companies are doing? I'll start with you, Mr. Murren.
Sure. I think that people are concerned about the manufacturing side. I'm not. There's a lot of talent in this room, talent we partner with that are coming up with great innovations. We all know what the issue is. The customers of today are more social. They interact, they're gatherers. They are not set on their itineraries, which is why I'm building parks and outdoor environments, because I can't tell them what to do, and the manufacturers can't tell them what products to play. We have to adapt to the customer. Las Vegas and other resort markets have been great at that. So what are we doing? We have a table product that's being tested at Mirage and at MGM right now that you can get on Facebook. You can watch one of your games. You can play fantasy sports, and oh, by the way, you can gamble a little bit. The manufacturers are working on products that create these social environments, and we're working to reconfigure casino floors to accommodate that very fact. And we're working with the major manufacturers about the floors of the future. And we incubated a company called My Vegas, which today is a social game, which about 1 million of you a day play, thank you very much, for hours a day. And it's a great customer acquisition tool. And we're looking at fantasy sports, and we're looking at a variety of other ways to interact with the customer. The days of just changing the belly glass of a machine are obviously over. But the days of getting back to our roots are not. You know, people were going back to a lot of the great product you'll see on this floor are brands that we grew up loving. And now we haven't thought about them in a while, and they're back. And that's great for someone that's in his 50s. So I think it's a combination of becoming social, adapting to the fact that the gamers like skill-based games, and as close as we can get to that through compliance, the better. Yeah. The environment, the social environments are critical, and the manufacturers and the operators have to work together on this, because it's nobody's sole responsibility. Otherwise, we're going to be irrelevant down the road, and none of us want that.
Of course, that begs the age-old question that's probably been asked at every G2E setting like this one over the years, which is, are the regulators nimble enough to handle the evolving demands of an ever complex industry?
There are a lot of regulators out here in the audience, and I love you all. As someone that's in a privileged industry, which means I have the privilege of being regulated by everybody and second-guessed by more. I think my observation is the regulatory environments are evolving now more rapidly than they have in a long time. And there's a recognition amongst U.S. regulators that we're part of a global business, and that no two jurisdictions have to be identical. They have to be cooperative and work together. And that we're finding in my home state here in Nevada and many other states a great willingness to adapt, more so than I have seen in the last 30 years. So I'm actually quite bullish on regulatory reform being as robust as it can possibly be, but adaptive.
Okay. Jim, what do you think about millennials as gamblers and regulators? If you want to chime in?
I think what's interesting is, and I certainly concur with Jim's comments, but I look at it, each market has its own individual characteristics. And if we look at, say, our property in Tampa, and we're very fortunate, obviously, because of the monopoly we have in that particular part of the state, and that's all about gaming. That is $40 million going in on a Saturday night, and it's one thing, it's casino, and it's casino, and it's casino. But then you look at some of the other different markets, say like a Las Vegas, where it's about entertainment. So you're needing to create, I believe, products and entertainment decisions based upon the markets you're in. I think the concern the industry should have is in the regional markets where you're in a competitive environment, There's incredibly high tax rates. And the model was built on a casino, ROI. And so you don't have the capital to create the true entertainment amenities that can potentially attract, the younger individuals. And we're very fortunate because one of the things we navigate through is, frankly, sometimes we think our brand goes too young. There's not a lot of discretionary income that's coming from a 21 to 30-year-old, to say the least. But certainly if we can market to those individuals that are in their 40s, 50s, and 60s, then obviously that creates a better ROI. I'll concur once again with Jim. Certainly, I received one of the first key licenses in New Jersey, and I remember that process of how challenging that was back in 1980 to what it is today. And I think, without question, overall, there's a much more working hand-in-hand relationship with the regulatory authorities, not just on a state level, but frankly, in other countries. I just came back from Asia and sitting with representatives, senior government officials in Vietnam, Cambodia, places like this. And there is definitely an acknowledgement of the success that, frankly, that's happened in Singapore from a regulatory standpoint. Certainly, we know the dollars that are happening in Macau are legendary. But I think you can have that combination to create a regulatory environment where we don't lose the integrity. People say, Jim, what's the most important thing to you as an individual? Honesty and integrity. We've been doing this too long, and people that are trying to get ahead, what I refer to as the make the quick buck, that's an immediate diversion for myself and for our organizations. And as you look at those countries, regulators coming here to the United States, obviously Nevada, and the key states that have been around for a long time, I think those relationships are very important.
So, Jim, you had referenced sports, and perhaps there is a demographic note to make here about the degree to which younger populations are attracted to sports wagering. Certainly,
I knew Bo would get us to sports eventually.
So we promised to do that backstage. Well, and when you look at the broader landscape, of course, you have Adam Silver, the new commissioner of the NBA, expressing, if not a willingness, at least an openness that we've not seen before to sports wagering. Having said that, of course, we learned that in New Jersey today, or yesterday perhaps, the four major sports leagues are going after New Jersey's decision to try to open up the sports wagering world. To what degree do the two of you see the sports wagering product being incorporated into your casino floors more over the next few years? Do you see this as something that's about to liberalize? Do you think that people like Adam Silver and the sorts of statements that they're making are promising for those properties that want to offer these sports wagers?
From my standpoint, I think that it's acknowledging what the desires are of the individual. And, if anybody is naive enough to think that sports betting isn't going on in virtually every office or every store or every bar in the world, then certainly, that's a little bit, as I mentioned, naive. I think when you think about fantasy football and how the NFL has embraced that, I think we all know why they've done that. So like anything, like our industry, how it's certainly taken a few decades to be acceptable that we're not all bad guys or ladies that are operating in some cloud of illusion. And I think that's the case with sports betting. To me, I don't look at it as this tremendous EBITDA producing area. I look at it that as it becomes more available in different states, it'll create more foot traffic. So what's happening at the local bar hopefully can happen in our entertainment complexes and obviously be able to create more jobs and grow the industry.
All right. Do you see things the same way, Jim, in terms of putting your CFO hat back on and thinking about the return on investment of a sports book, which can take up some acreage on the floor? Do you see this as a more important segment of your floor moving forward?
I do. In the days past, we allocated areas, we called it race and sports, but it's now sports and race. And if you go to Aria today, as an example, the sports book is front and center, where most original configurations had the race front and center and the sports off to the side. And the new generation of areas is the reverse of that because of the trajectory of popularity of sports versus race. I'd only add, I agree 100% with Jim, I'd only add a few things. We have the Pac-12 basketball tournament at MGM. First year we had it, people loved it. Nobody left here with two heads, and the NCAA got more comfortable with that. We're building a new 20,000 seat arena. I'm highly confident will be a regional site for March Madness. I think that will happen. We have Frozen Fury this weekend at Exhibition Hockey at MGM. We're bringing the Clippers and the Lakers in every year. And so every time we have one of these events and it becomes a positive event, it just mainstreams and provides more bridges between sports and our industry. And I'll say something about fantasy, which is a stunning thing to me. I've been married 23 years. My wife, and we have 2 boys, my wife to this day knows nothing about sports. Impossible to believe, raising 2 kids, but this, for the first year, she is the commissioner of a fantasy football league with 9 of her girlfriends. Her team's called the Altar Boys with a Z. And she's going for players that haven't been in trouble, haven't hit anybody, haven't been arrested. And she's having a hard time filling a roster week to week.
It's a little challenging.
Sample
but,
size
But luckily she has 8 other girlfriends that know even less about football than she does. And she's winning and she's having a ball. So it's obvious what's happening. And I think the more we get this out in the open and the more people understand that this is a very healthy, fun way to entertain oneself.
You can tell that I have a 2-year-old and a 4-year-old at home because my fantasy football team name is the Tackle Me Elmos. I'm very proud of that Sesame Street reference. So one of the things you mentioned, the sportsbook at Aria. I was in the sportsbook at Aria during the World Cup, and it was electric. And I wondered about whether we can make a connection here or not. One of the things that's been striking, of course, in Las Vegas is the degree to which the Baccarat numbers have been quite impressive and have been growing. And that's not coming from Des Moines, right? So those aren't folks who are commuting over here from the Midwest. Are we seeing, you mentioned mainstreaming, Jim, and certainly we've seen this with Hard Rock as well, these products being mainstreamed, being exposed to a world that finds out that they like it, and then in fact it boomerangs back to Las Vegas. We're going to talk about Atlantic City in a moment, but of course back in the day people were so worried in Las Vegas about Atlantic City, but it turned out it exposed a new customer to the product, and those folks ended up coming back to Las Vegas. Is that what we're seeing with these Baccarat numbers, whereby places like Macau are exposing new populations to the gambling product, the gambling act, and then those figures are sort of boomeranging back here in the form of the Baccarat numbers or World Cup activity?
Well, there's no doubt about that. That we're getting every year more and more customers coming to Las Vegas as a result of the fact that they have gambled in Singapore or Macau. And Wynn Resorts, Las Vegas Sands, MGM have benefited from the fact we have operations in both Macau and Las Vegas, in the case of Sands, Macau and Singapore and Las Vegas. There's no doubt about that. And that's exciting because there's such a small percentage of the mainland Chinese person that's ever been to Macau, as big as that market is today. And that's why we're all excited about Japan, which is probably on your list of questions to ask. As it relates to the World Cup, we're doing a lot more with football, with the U, and both with the product itself and with many of the teams themselves because of this great popularity. And that will be something that you'll see in the future with MGM partnering up with soccer or football clubs on a branding basis for that very reason. And so we reach out. It's a global business we live in, and we have brands that are appealing to many of the sports brands. Many sports team owners are very receptive to partnering, I'm sure, with Jim and with ourselves. And I think you'll see more and more of that bonding, which again brings it back to your prior question of why I'm confident that you'll see sports betting over time. It's worked okay in the UK for a long time. It doesn't seem to have hurt them there, and that's why I think it's going to happen here.
What do you think, Jim? Are you seeing similar trends as it pertains to this boomeranging effect across the Pacific Ocean, for example?
Well, what's very interesting, we now have, I believe 6 employees on the ground, direct employees of ours, that are in Asia, whether it be Malaysia or Hong Kong or wherever it may be. Certainly the World Cup this year, Miami was a natural stop. So we definitely saw an increase of those individuals that, initially played, say, in Macau, obviously developed their relationships here in Las Vegas with Jim's company and the other individuals that focus and frankly have the financial wherewithal to play in that particular league. Because we certainly know these are not individuals that are just coming in with a $500,000 or $1 million. It's a whole other conversation. So there was a tremendous amount of activity in the Hard Rock in Hollywood, specifically related to World Cup. And I think we'll see those trends continue to grow. In our vision over the next 5–10 years, we certainly spend a lot of time navigating the success of the city of Miami being an international gateway city. So, and we're only 30 minutes from Miami and 10 minutes from Fort Lauderdale. You have 2 airports directly accessible. And that, frankly, is an attraction because you can say, okay, utilize the casino, go to Miami. Or in the case of our relationship, we have a partnership with Universal and a Hard Rock hotel there. Families stay at Universal. The guest, if you will, comes to the Hard Rock in Tampa. And we're seeing that business actually grow and substantially for us.
So speaking of globalization and thinking about, again, the evolution of the industry, as I know both of you are fascinated by, when you look at the global economy, which is increasingly a post-industrial economy, upwards of 10% of the global dollars spent, of the global money spent, 1 out of every $10 is spent now on tourism, as more and more humans achieve the means to up and move themselves from one place on the planet to another place of the planet, which starts to reveal the degree to which tourism certainly has become a major slice of the global economy. And within that 10%, I think you can make an argument that the integrated resort, to invoke the Singaporean euphemism that's a little confusing and perhaps misleading, but the casino resort is perhaps its most dynamic private sector invention. Certainly, places like Disneyland, amusement parks, Universal Studios are in that conversation, but you can make an argument that those don't generate the economic activity, aren't as lucrative, aren't as far-reaching as it pertains to job creation and these sorts of things as the invention that is buildings like this. Is this overstating the gaming case? Have we invented the most dynamic, most lucrative driver of economic activity within a sector that, oh, by the way, nowadays is about 10% of the global economy? Is that an outlandish statement?
Can I tackle that one? Because
yeah.
I feel pretty passionate about this one. Your numbers are correct, Bo. The travel industry globally is about a $6.6 trillion business. 260 million people around the world are employed by this industry that we're employed by, 260 million people. The travel industry is twice as big as the global automotive industry. And we're 50% bigger than the global chemical industry. We're just not getting our story out that we need to get out. And this is a plug for the AGA and sister organizations to talk about what we represent. Why is a job in our industry less worthy than an auto job? Is it less patriotic to work for MGM than GM? I don't think so. And I think that we need to really understand our role and embrace that role. So the first point is it's a big, big business. And we have to work with other people to get that out because it's about the future of the families that are employed, the 260 million employees in their future. So I feel very strongly that we become more global. The gaming industry is an important subset of the tourist industry. In many parts of the world, they're completely integrated, and others less so, in some cases not at all, but that's changing. And we're adapting to that change. And I could tell you as, sitting where I'm sitting, and I'm sure my peers in this industry look at everything that we do from a global perspective, whether it's in Tunica, Mississippi, or in Detroit, Michigan, or on the Gulf Coast, or in Atlantic City, or every decision we make is done with a global. It's global and local. And the convoluence, glocal, we'll call it.
Yeah.
It's global. It's looking at your business on a localized basis, but with a global lens. And that's why I'm more encouraged about our industry than I was, say, 10 years ago or 15 years ago, because I see more opportunity to cross-pollinate with other markets.
Yeah, I'm struck by, again, the evolution. My great-great grandfather who came out to Las Vegas to work in this business couldn't have found Macau on a map to save his life. When I graduated from high school, I couldn't have picked a U.S. passport out of a lineup of passports to save my life, right? And all of us have had to grow up and mature, and we've made mistakes in this globalization process. It's difficult, but not unlike a whole lot of businesses that have had to globalize of late. What do you think, Jim? What have you seen in your...
You know, a recent example, just this past Saturday, we have a partnership with Mission Hills over in China. You know, they're an amazing company that's been the most successful company at golf, and frankly, in virtually not just that part of the world, but on a global footprint. And, you know, we have a brand new hotel that's being, we were actually approved the model room on Saturday. And I think it really goes back to the opening comment, how do brands relate to that? So tourism and the hospitality and the entertainment industry, if you have a brand, you know, that can create the excitement, and as companies develop, you know, a focus on brands, I think that can expand and obviously then create the jobs, and more importantly, the acknowledgement that we are, I always say we have a job for everybody. You know, if we go into a particular region, is anybody an upholsterer? You know, because if we're building an entertainment destination, a casino in a local economy, if you're in the upholstery business, if we don't do it in-house, but even if you have a shop, come work for us, because we have a lot of furniture around here that needs repairing on a, you know, annual basis. So I think the industry is growing. The concept of watching people and being around people literally goes back to the creation of man and woman. So it really starts there. People talk about internet gaming and the concept of being in an individual environment. It's attractive. Obviously, social media is incredible, but when it's all said and done, we as humans love to interact with other, you know, from a human nature standpoint.
I'm struck by what you say about having a job for everyone. Certainly this room is a tribute to that. I went to my high school reunion recently. I won't tell you which one, but I'm getting up there. And the guy who pulled up in the Ferrari is the bedsheet guy in town. Actually, he's one of many bedsheet guys in town, and he's got a ZZ Top beard, the Hard Rock reference there. He's got long hair. He's pulling up with somebody who maybe hadn't yet graduated from high school, but he's someone who's doing quite well as the guy who puts bed sheets on 5,000
I'm sure I paid for that Ferrari.
I'm sure he paid for that Ferrari, right? It's a striking evolution, and as evidenced by, again, rooms like this and rooms like my high school reunion. So, you know, thinking about, you just got back from Asia. Certainly, Jim, you're flying over the Pacific quite a bit. Both of you have memorized, I'm sure, flight schedules heading over the Pacific Ocean. One of the things I say often to my students is the mistake that American businesses in particular make often with Asia is calling it Asia as if it were one thing, one monolithic thing, devoid of diversity within. You just got back from a whirlwind tour looking at all sorts of places on and off the gaming map. Do you want to talk a little bit about the degree to which you've observed perhaps differences there, or at least, you know, your business practices have had to evolve in recognition of the complexity out in Asia?
I think you're advising your students accurately. I mean, certainly the culture, and if you just look at the relations between China and Vietnam right now, you know, and if you look at the amount of business that was, you know, coming to certain particular regions that's moving because of different relationships, you know, it's obviously, it's an environment where you need to be respectful to each of the cultures that are there. I think that when it's all said and done, you know, a lot of this particular part of the world still is a third world country. You know, if you really get behind the scenes in places like Vietnam or Cambodia, certainly Japan a little bit different. But it's, you know, we are so fortunate what we have here in the United States. But then you think about the 1.8 billion Chinese that are the most, or the largest traveling segment now in the world. So they are interested in seeing things abroad. And I think if we can create as an industry, not just as an MGM or a Hard Rock brand, but as an industry that there is something to do here in Las Vegas or Miami or obviously the great destination cities we have here in the United States, that's good for everyone. And then us as leaders, you know, because when it's all said and done, make no mistake, destination resorts do not work without the casino component. There is a few examples where that's not the case, but overall, the gaming component certainly helps, you know, an ROI. It's very difficult to go out and commit to spending $3, $4, $5, $6 billion and not have that particular piece of the model. So I think in conclusion, when we can create that environment where destinations are something to see, that has entertainment, we can create the jobs, be respectful to those cultures that obviously are, you know, interested in traveling abroad. And when we're in their country, the most important thing, I think, and I'm obviously, you know, I've been in the industry for 34 years. There are legends in the industry, but we always come in knowing we're going to find local partners, we're going to be respectful to government and regulation, and we don't come in with specific demands. And when it's all said and done, very humbly, but we're already doing this in 58 countries. So we have a track record to say, and in every one of those relationships, it's a partnership. There is not, I shouldn't say there's not, because certainly some of the cafes over in Western Europe, we own those 100%. But most of the relationships, frankly, are with local partners. And that really is started by the initiation of being respect to the country, to your local partners, and as I opened with, the integrity of ethics and ethics of doing business.
Right. Jim, what lessons have you learned as your company started to span the globe? And again, you think about a place like Japan, where you and I have been together on a couple of occasions, and you're visiting places like Singapore. Singapore and Japan are very different places. And actually, as you go all up and down Southeast Asia, all the way up to Northeast Asia, you're struck by the degree to which there are actually relatively few cultural universals. The one, I'm working on this, and I'm a social scientist, I'm trained in observations like this. Aside from the cultural observation that it might be that karaoke is universal all up and down Asia, I struggle sometimes to find similarities. I'm struck by difference. As you engage these different places, what lessons have you learned? How do you navigate these often complex worlds across the Pacific?
Well, I think Jim's answer was fantastic, and I think I don't want to repeat exactly, but the thoughts of humility and partnership and integrity and understanding of cultural differences is, you know, I can't overemphasize that. So to try to add to a great answer, I would just say that there's no such thing as American food, and there's no such thing as Japanese food, or Chinese food, or Vietnamese food. There are 47 different prefectures in Japan alone, and that means there are at least 47 different distinct cuisines. There's different cultures, there's different traditions. The traditions of Okinawa are very different than Osaka, and very different Osaka from Greater Tokyo. And so we do a lot of listening and learning. I'm an analyst by training. I'm a kind of information junkie, and I love art. I love culture. So it's not a burden to go to these beautiful countries. Enjoy it. So I think the concepts of knowing that you don't have the answers, you just have some role to play because of the specialized nature of the industry that we're in. And the lessons that we've learned the hard way can be additive to another country. And looking at it from that perspective, instead of going in and say, well, I'll do this and get out of my way, and that approach doesn't work. I don't think any operator here will try to do that. The Las Vegas Sands has been incredibly successful. Steve Wynn, incredibly successful. My mentor, my idol, Kirk Kerkorian, incredibly successful by being Caesars Entertainment, by being very appreciative and adaptive to local environments. And we need to. 40 million people will visit Las Vegas this year. 20% of them are from outside the United States. That's the fastest growing trend in Las Vegas, as you know. We work with Homeland Security and the State Department to continue to push for better visa opportunities from places like South America and China and Asia, North American cities in Mexico and in Canada and with Europe. The more we can globalize our business and create that seamless opportunity for those Chinese travelers and the rest of the world, the better off we're all going to be.
Let's come back stateside and talk. We can't avoid talking about Atlantic City, and certainly your hometown, Jim. You're expert at a biographical and professional level here. At this G2E, what's your take on the state of events in Atlantic City, and maybe your take more generally of one of the issues that the AGA has to confront, which is other new jurisdictions pointing to Atlantic City as an illustration of how the gaming industry can go wrong?
You know, obviously Atlantic City is in some real difficult, you know, situations from an image standpoint and perception standpoint, certainly with the closure of, you know, the casinos that have already occurred and the talk of potentially another one, you know, happening in the next month or so. You know, it's really a lesson in history. You know, having started there in 1979, I certainly recall the lines on the boardwalk and all the amazing things that were going to happen. And the reality is that, frankly, back in those times, and certainly that's not the case today, but when you look at the regulations, I was actually on a Casino Control Commission task force back when Chairman Persky was still involved. And, you know, we, as industry representatives, were saying, you know, it's almost impossible. We can't hire a band in a lounge without asking for the Gaming Commission's approval. Obviously, all those regulations are behind us, but I think if you look historically, there were some very good years in Atlantic City, but the infrastructure in the town itself was never addressed. If you look at Pacific Avenue today, and if you look at it 10 years ago or 30 years ago, very, very politely, it's actually gotten worse. So I think that if you come in, you know, an amazingly successful project that David Cordish did called The Walk, it'll show that if you have a product that things can move forward. But until the town and the state are serious about changing the perception of Atlantic City, then I think, frankly, the future is a little bit, you know, difficult. Certainly, I think that when you think of MGM's investment with Borgata, and obviously the amazing success there, and even what Tillman has done with the Gold Nugget recently, you know, that's been a nice turnaround. Harris has always done well. The Marina District is almost like, you know, on another planet, and that's fine, and those properties will hopefully do well on a long-term basis. My honest opinion, and not from a selfish standpoint, is we obviously possess the rights for gaming at the Meadowlands. If gaming is approved in North Jersey, and I've said this to the highest ranking individuals in that state, if you're just going to give Atlantic City a $50 or $100 million subsidy, you might as well give it to the homeless. You know, but if there is some type of monetization of those potential taxes that create true infrastructure improvement and focus more on a 2 or 3 night visitation, somebody that's within a 2-hour air flight, maybe there's a future. I'll conclude with this. You know, they made this big announcement that United Airlines has come to Atlantic City International Airport. We've been tracking all summer, where if you're in Houston, so your decision is virtually the same flight, to fly to Las Vegas or fly to Atlantic City. On average, the price into Atlantic City Airport is $400 to $600 more per ticket. So if you suggest to your significant other, hey, let's get away this weekend, you go online, you say, you know, United, let's go to Atlantic City, anywhere from $800 to $1,500 a ticket. If you want to fly to Las Vegas, anywhere from $380 to, you know, $760 something per ticket. So until those issues are addressed, and frankly, that's where the industry can help. You mentioned my experience working with Saul Kirshner. You know, we spent all that money at Atlantis, but the most successful thing we did, and frankly, it was the buildings were amazing. We used to joke with Saul, you know, you're going to sink the island if we keep building here anymore. But it was the airlift. It was the airlift that we created for markets like Atlanta and New York to come back to the Bahamas. Atlantic City needs to change its perception and its image, and it's not going to be give them 50 or 100 million this year, maybe too candid and direct. If you look at the first thing they did in this new, they created that park where the sands used to be. And I say, has anybody seen that? I mean, if that's the decisions that are going to happen on a going forward basis, then I think the market has some challenges. People love the brand, believe it or not. All the studies show they still like that brand. The question is, it needs real capital and infrastructure. And obviously, the existing properties, you know, from a reinvestment is also something that's very important.
Jim, can I ask you to put your AGA hat on for a bit? Clearly, this is something that a lot of new jurisdictions are now citing as a how not to, or at the very least, a worst case scenario that the gaming industry can represent. What's the AGA doing? What do you think the industry as a whole has to do on this narrative front?
Specific to Atlantic City? Specific
to Atlantic City being cited as, you know.
Yeah, I agree with Jim's comments. We're going to have like an off-site Jim. We're agreeing with everything. You know, it is a $2.5 billion market. Let's not lose sight of the fact that it is still a large market, employing a lot of people. And sure, the mistakes made are well known, but to look forward and what to do. The Renaissance Point, which we're proud to have named, you know, MGM owns 50 acres right next to Borgata, and of course, Boyd is doing a tremendous job managing Borgata for the both of us. And we're going to look at what we can do in Renaissance Point now that we're relicensed in Atlantic City. We look forward to working with the governor, very pro-business governor, obviously. It's a different legislature. It's a different gaming commission, different DGE. Everything's different today. And a lot of smart minds in Atlantic City and in New Jersey that could tie in northern New Jersey to Atlantic City and create the type of long-term reimagining, maybe going back to the heydays of Atlantic City as a family destination, as a getaway weekend. And of course, the airport needs to be utilized. Jim is completely right on that. That's ridiculous. Property taxes are absurdly high there. And someone tried to get a property tax relief just this week, and he was shot down. Right. So that doesn't encourage me that owns a lot of land to invest, or anyone else. And so there has to be immediate regulatory and tax structural reforms. Otherwise, by the time gaming comes to northern New Jersey, if it does, there'll be nothing left of Atlantic City to save. And so I think there's, now the AGA, what is the AGA doing? We're educating on the value of the industry as part of this tourism industry that we talked about, the importance of jobs, the fact that on average we're majority minority companies. The majority of my employees are minorities. So what are we working toward in terms of getting people to work and providing good careers and helping many folks that have just kind of pulling themselves out of bad situations. And Atlantic City is an example of what we can try to do to help. It's not about casting blame. No one's doing that anymore. New jurisdictions, look at how robust Maryland is right now. And Jim mentioned David Cordish, and Maryland Live is just crushing it right now in Arundel Mills. And Horseshoe just opened a beautiful casino in Baltimore. And so there are good stories that counter what has been a sad situation that I don't think would ever be replicated. I think lessons learned will mean that the Atlantic City issues that Jim suffered through will never be replicated in a new jurisdiction. And Atlantic City, I'm actually, because I'm Irish and I'm optimistic, I'm actually believe that Atlantic City has a brighter future than it does today. And I'm willing to work with the state to try to work toward that goal. But there has to be a collective public-private partnership to do it.
So another thing I have to ask you both about, and unfortunately we just have a few minutes left, but in New Jersey, certainly the internet gaming dynamic, and specifically the dynamic between trying to coordinate between brick and mortar operations and online operations, we're seeing this play out before our very eyes this year. What are your observations in the limited time we have left about the internet and its operations and how that will affect your big building operations in places like the one we're in right now?
I want to hear what Jim has to say.
It's interesting, if you look 7, 8, 9 years ago, I was 100% opposed to internet gaming. And all of a sudden I started looking and said, okay, we're going to develop an internet gaming committee and we're going to get really smart. Well, that committee's been together for about 6 years, and we've still been unable to make a decision, and including a meeting yesterday and one tomorrow at 6 o'clock. Obviously, there certainly is a business model on a long-term basis that makes sense. I don't have any regrets. As I look at all the different companies or potential partners that we could have entered into a relationship, one of the things we do have is obviously the brand has the worldwide exposure, and that's something that's valuable. I think if you look at, the early results in New Jersey, certainly maybe not to the expectations that the state or some of the operators would have hoped for, but certainly if you, listen to Tom Ballins from Borgata, if we're reinventing ways to talk to our guests and customers, then I guess that's a positive. I think that, once again, the integrity side of this is very, very important. And I think to understand where this industry is going to be in this category takes time. And when you look at debates between the state and at the federal level, and then, I sit in a very, very unique position where, remember, I'm also responsible for Seminole Gaming, which is under the sovereignty of the tribes. So you have obviously the sovereignty issue on Native American reservations versus the other, state or potential federal regulations. And I think there's a future. I think caution is, from our perspective, the appropriate approach. Certainly social has been very successful, but actual wagering, I think it's a very slow, conservative viewpoint from our company standpoint.
Okay. And I would add that, you know, we wanted very badly a federal solution here. We at MGM, the AGA had a similar position, and unfortunately, like many things, that didn't happen in DC. And so we are where we are today, but a federal solution would have been preferable for all the regulatory compliance reasons, crime prevention. Now, so where are we now? We believe in internet gaming. I'm not intimidated by it as a bricks and mortar operator because I believe that we create those personalized experiences that we talked about before. I do think it's a business opportunity for MGM, and I think we're all kidding ourselves if we think by banning it, it's going to go away. And so I understand the challenges around it, how hard we have to preserve the integrity of our industry and prevent those who should not gamble from gambling, whether it's in our casinos, at a sports book, on an iPad, or on the online gambling on the internet. We have to preserve that. But that said, who better to do that than the gaming industry, the ones that have billions of dollars invested, the ones that employ tens of thousands of people. And that's the view that I have, that we can't wish it away. We can help, you know, preserve the integrity of our industry, because let's face it, if somebody has a bad experience gambling illegally here in the United States, we're all tarnished by that. So I feel like it's a responsibility of all of us not only to have a leadership role. I also believe there is a commercial opportunity if done correctly, and we can't wish it away.
Very good. Well, we are right up against our time limit. I want to thank all of you for joining us bright and early in the morning. Please join me in thanking our two CEOs, Jim Allen and Jim Murren. And have a wonderful G2E day. Thanks, everyone.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for attending G2E State of the Industry Operators. Our next seminar will begin at 10:30 a.m. and is part of this year's educational program. If you have a seminar attendee badge, you are welcome to remain in the room and enjoy the next seminar. Thank you.
Looking for a girl that will see it.